But if you want to preserve your power indefinitely, you have to get the consent of the rule, and this they will do.
Everything out of the ordinary is to be reported.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
That's an interesting picture. It was a church. Do you know that word? Yes, there were still churches when I was a child.
You know, there was a time in human history when God and the hand of science were the same.
MK Ultra mind control rules in Hollywood. If you don't know, Google that and look into it.
Some of the names of criminals is hardly informing.
Criminals. Salad and patriots.
Patriots, like patriots!
You're listening to Beyond Extraordinary with Natalina.
Hey guys, welcome to another thrilling, exciting, and can't be missed episode of Beyond Extraordinary. As always, I am your host, Natalina, and today's guest is fantastic. I've been sitting on this interview for about a week now because I've been so busy, but I'm really excited to share it with you. My guest was Derek Gilbert of View from the Bunker and PID Radio, which he hosts along with his beautiful, stunning, and magnificently intelligent wife, Sharon Gilbert. She was meant to be on this interview, but she was not feeling well, and so Derek took the reins and did the show for both of them. And she was definitely here in spirit, and we discussed a lot of her talents and contributions. So it was just a really wonderful interview. Derek and I discussed we just kind of had some banter about a few things that we have in common, such as debate and North Dakota. More on that to come. But we also got a chance to hear the story of Derek's personal story, how he met Sharon, how PID Radio came into being, about his writing, about his love of science fiction. We also talked about Derek's presentations that he gave at the recent Orlando Prophecy Summit, hosted by Prophecy in the News. He gave two wonderful speeches. One dealt with data collection and the NSA and spying and this type of thing. Really interesting take on that, by the way. You won't want to miss that. And the second was with regard to dominionism and Kingdom Now theology, which also is such an important topic, and really I haven't had anyone discuss it the way Derek does. He's clearly quite passionate about it, and he put his heart into his work for his research. So you're really, really going to enjoy listening to this. And we also touch a little bit on transhumanism. We talk about his interview that he did some time back, might be probably more than a year ago now, with Dr. Hugo de Garis, and that name may also sound familiar because Basil and Gons over at Canary Cry Radio also recently interviewed Hugo de Garis, and he, of course, is famous for his futurist ideas. Well, of course, he's like a brilliant scientist, but also he wrote the book, The Art-Elect War. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining it because you can just listen to the interview Derek did with him, or you can listen to the Canary Cry Radio interview, or you can listen to both of them, which I have done and I would recommend. I'll put the links in the show notes. But the reason I'm bringing that up now is because just earlier today, an article came through my news feed, and the headline speaks a little bit to what we've all been talking about for the past however long. And the article headline states, Stephen Hawking says AI could be our worst mistake in history, which is like a really sensational headline, right? And I thought, my gosh, is Stephen Hawking backtracking on AI? He's always seemed to be sort of like one of the granddaddies of promoting the next step of evolution and transhumanism and all of this stuff. But apparently, he has some hesitations. So as I read the article, I learned that he, along with computer scientist Stuart Russell and a number of prominent physicists, and they got together and they talked about the potential benefits and risks of a future that involves artificial intelligence. And I'm going to read you a section of what they wrote recently in The Independent. And again, I will link the entire article in the show notes, but this is a few paragraphs long, but I just want to read it to you and see what you think. So it says, looking further ahead, there are no fundamental limits to what can be achieved. There is no physical law precluding particles from being organized in ways that perform even more advanced computations than the arrangements of particles in human brains. An explosive transition is possible, although it may play out differently from in the movies. As Irving Good realized in 1965, machines with superhuman intelligence could repeatedly improve their design even further, triggering what Werner Vinge called a singularity and Johnny Depp's movie character calls transcendence. One can imagine such technology outsmarting financial markets, out-inventing human researchers, out-manipulating human leaders, and developing weapons that we cannot even understand. Whereas the short-term impact of AI depends on who controls it, the long-term impact depends on whether it can be controlled at all. So, facing possible futures of incalculable benefits and risks, experts are surely doing everything possible to ensure the best outcome, right? Wrong. If a superior alien civilization sent us a message saying, we'll arrive in a few decades, would we reply, okay, call us when you get here, we'll leave the lights on? Probably not. But this is more or less what is happening with AI. Although we are facing potentially the best or worst thing to happen to humanity in history, little serious research is devoted to these issues outside of nonprofit institutes, such as the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk, the Future of Humanity Institute, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, and the Future Life Institute. All of us should ask ourselves what we can do now to improve the chances of reaping the benefits and avoiding the risks. So that's the warning that's coming to us from these prominent scientists, not the least of which being the well-known Stephen Hawking. I think the headline is a bit misleading because I don't think that Stephen Hawking or any of his comrades here are saying anything along the lines of artificial intelligence being a mistake. They certainly seem to be full speed ahead with it. They see it as an inevitability. They're just issuing caution. You know, I don't think they have any hesitation about the future of artificial intelligence as far as whether or not it should be pursued. I think they're more concerned about what could potentially happen if we don't take some precautionary measures, which is really weird and interesting. I thought the whole thing was a little bit wishy-washy, and it kind of made me wonder, like, what's the point? Why did they even feel the need to come out and say all of this stuff? Because I don't know. It just seemed really weird. I'm going to link to the article, the full article in the show notes, and you can read it, and I would love to hear what you all think about that interesting little tidbit that comes right on the heels of some of our recent discussions on extraordinaryintelligence.com and here on Beyond Extraordinary. As always, I invite you to go to extraordinaryintelligence.com and check out our recent articles. I've recently posted a few things that you will probably be interested in. There's an article I wrote about the Christ consciousness lie. I had been notified by a few different people that I often cite Christ consciousness when I talk about things with regard to the New Age, but I've never really given a really good description as to what that means. And so that article attempts to explain it. explains what the New Age practitioners mean when they say Christ consciousness, and it has nothing to do with Jesus. Okay. Secondly, there's the most recent article that was posted is actually a book review that I teamed up with author Chris Putnam. He and I were really disturbed when we heard about this new book that had come out called Apostle Paul Antichrist. The author, Jeffrey Doherty, was on Coast to Coast AM. George Norrie wrote the foreword to his book. And obviously the title itself is enough to just offend anyone who, who is familiar with who Apostle Paul truly was. I mean, it's goes beyond that title, though. When you dig into not only the contents of the book, which is just atrocious. I mean, it's poorly written, but it's like a narrative. It's a novel, but he claims it's based on facts, and I won't, tell you what the biggest fact he released about how he came to these claims, how he came to believe these claims were true. You'll have to read the article to hear all of that. So it's really long. Chris and I are super big nerds, and we just wrote a super long essay about the atrociousness not only of the book, but of the movement that Jeffrey Doherty is proclaiming to have started. So anyway, I have yammered on long enough. You might want to go over to extraordinaryboutique.com, however, because I revamped the whole site. It's a whole new setup. It looks really snazzy and profesh. And, Mother's Day is right around the corner. You might want to just give it a look. That's all my handmade jewelry. And email me if you have any questions about that. That's it. Get ready. Derek Gilbert on Beyond Extraordinary.
No. Detonate the reality bomb!
So early in my Christian walk, I found myself in this weird place where I was an investigator and researcher of conspiracy, the paranormal, and supernatural, and yet I was trying to parse all of that information through a biblical lens. And I found it really difficult to make sense of it all while I was looking for answers in mainstream Christian circles. Often I found that the emphasis was on disassociating one's brain from the big questions and to be content with the pat answers to complicated issues. I found myself wondering if being a Christian meant that it was necessary for me to never talk about things that were on the fringe of mainstream thought. Through a series of web searches, I happened upon a show called View from the Bunker. Now, being a conspiracy buff myself, the title alone was enough to draw me in. I was introduced to a man named Derek Gilbert who was an unquestionably solid Christian. Yet he was talking about the things that interested me, and through the subject matter, he made a really compelling case for why it is not only acceptable, but actually beneficial for Christians to examine these types of topics. I went through the archives and I just devoured many episodes of VFTB, and that led me to PID Radio, which features both Derek and his wife Sharon Gilbert, and I instantly felt a kinship with Sharon because she was an unapologetically intelligent woman who is also unapologetically Christian, and was just the type of person I needed to encounter to make me feel more comfortable with the direction I was personally heading. So when I go to the PID Radio website, there's this line there that says the Gilberts emphasize the joy of living for Christ in the midst of doom and gloom news. And I just love that. I say an enthusiastic amen. And it is my honor to welcome Derek Gilbert to Beyond Extraordinary. Derek, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Natalina, it's an honor. And Sharon sends her apologies. She's suffering a fibromyalgia flare-up. And I believe I'm at least partly responsible because I didn't get the grass clippings raked up out of the yard before I went away for a barbershop quartet convention for the weekend. So while I was having fun yesterday, listening to 4-part a cappella harmony, she was raking the yard.
Aww.
Sometimes that kind of physical exertion will lead to a flare-up. And when that happens, it's like me when my sinuses kick in, a sinus headache, and I'm not good for anything. Well, she's best right now where she is at, which is relaxing on the couch and
yeah,
and waiting for it to pass. So anyway, she sends her apologies because, as you know, we've rescheduled this several times due to various medical issues between you and us. So I will do my best to carry the banner for PID Radio alone, even though she is probably the smartest of the three of us. So
I will agree to that, and she will be here with us in spirit. I just absolutely love Sharon. So prayers that she's feeling better very soon. And you're right, we have had so many setbacks with trying to do this interview. We've alternatively been traveling, and then we've all been sick with sinus infections, the severity of which has been chronicled for the ages by the Wall Street Journal, by the way.
Which is really funny because there was a friend of ours who, in fact, he's the fellow I shared the ride with. It was about a 4-hour trip to where the convention was this weekend, so we split the cost of a hotel room, and he's a school teacher, teaches current events, public speaking, and English lit, things like that at the high school level, about 30 miles south of where we live. And he happened to stumble onto that article in his daily search through the news for items to discuss with his kids. And he stumbled on it and said, Charleston? Okay, I know where that's at. Okay, I know who that is. So he made sure to bring it up when he stopped by on our way out to the Quad Cities. So yeah, it was kind of funny that after 9 years of podcasting, writing, what have we got? I think 5 published books between us, and contributing to 2 or 3 others published by Defender Publishing, speaking at 8 different prophecy conferences, and what finally gets us into the mainstream news is a couple of runny noses.
I think how did they even know that you were sick? I found that so surreal.
Well, it was kind of weird. Sharon tweeted something about the cold that won't go away, and the medical reporter for the Wall Street Journal happened to be looking on the web for clues, links perhaps to people who were suffering in what seemed to be an unusually severe cold season. So she found Sharon's tweet, sent her a private message, asked if she could call and discuss it with her. And she did, and the two of them hit it off well. I mean, Sharon, with her degree, with honors, I might add, in molecular biology, was able to speak on a peer level with the medical reporter. So, she asked some questions, got the spellings of our names, and then wrote the article from there.
That's so crazy. And it's true. It's been a really weird season for illnesses. And when I think it was the first time that I tried to arrange an interview with you, I got sick. I was the first person to get sick, and I was chatting with Sharon, and she said that you made a comment that I should try not to transmit my illness through the internet, and wouldn't you know, it was like 2 days later you were sick. So maybe it was my fault. It could have been.
No, it's possible. Who knows? The word computer virus may have more meaning than we think in the very near future.
I think you're right. I was just thinking it's been maybe a year now that you had me as a guest on View from the Bunker. And during that interview, I actually announced that I was going to be starting a podcast. In fact, I hadn't started it yet, and I announced that it was going to happen, and I was nervously discussing how I wasn't sure how it was going to go, and I was giving myself disclaimers about how maybe I'd be horrible at it, and I'd scrap the whole idea. And here we are on episode 20. I think it is so appropriate to have you as the guest, so I'm really looking forward to diving in with you.
Thank you. And yours is one of the podcasts that resides on my little iPod, which I'm holding here in my right hand. It travels with me as I go about my day job, which involves about 1,000 miles of driving a week. So there are a few that I make a must listen, and Beyond Extraordinary is one of them.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me. Some people may already know the story, but Derek, I would love for you to just tell people of how PID Radio and subsequently View from the Bunker came into being. What sort of sparked that, and what it's become now?
Well, it's I think a product of the paths down which Sharon and I have been led over the course of our lives. She, of course, has a really unique mind. The fact that she was able to make a career as a professional vocalist for a couple of decades, fronting rock and roll bands and then singing with a contemporary Christian group that traveled around the country and the UK for a year. Trained to sing opera. Had her own singing telegram business for a while. Sang at a jingle studio in Indianapolis for a while. Was offered an opportunity. I don't know. She doesn't really talk about this because she doesn't like to put the focus on herself, but I'm happy to do it because I think she's really cool. She was offered an opportunity to go on tour as the opening act for George Jones.
Wow. Back
in the day. This is when George was at the height of his popularity. She could have been the opening act for George Jones. And something in her spirit said, this doesn't feel right. These guys have dollar signs, what the pupils on her eyeballs should be. This is not right. And so she turned it down and went a different path. And eventually, after deciding that the life of an opera diva is not what she wanted, she went back home to Indiana to regroup, rethink, and went back to school, got her degree, again, with honors in molecular biology, was accepted into the PhD program, or a PhD program at IU without having a master's degree. Okay? Think about that. On the recommendation of the head of the School of Optometry, they accepted her into the PhD program without a master's.
That's incredible.
So she's got this very creative mind, which if you read any of her fiction, she brings characters to life. She is as gifted a fiction writer as is on this planet at this moment, in my opinion. And yet she's also got this mind that can look at things from a scientific perspective. And that has really helped her see connections that guys like me, who have a different set of skills and perceptions, can't. And she has, one of her first novels, The Armageddon Strain, was warning about the possibility of weaponized avian flu before the mainstream media was warning us about the dangers of H5N1. So, and her belief is that if she can think of it, if she can imagine it with her writer's mind, and her longtime love of mysteries. In fact, she's, I think, watching Poirot right now off of Netflix. Someone else has done it too. And she's generally proven to be correct. I mean, almost, and she won't use this term, and I'm not really applying it in the strict sense of the term, but almost prophetic in some of the things that she has written. Now, again, she does not claim that mantle because that requires 100% accuracy. So I'm not implying or suggesting that she is, but some of the things that she's predicted in her novels, in her writing, have been scary accurate. My background is a little different. I grew up, unlike my normal friends who, say, at the age of 10, 11, 12, were listening to the big AM top 40 stations in Chicago, and, like WLS and Super CFL and radio disc jockeys like Sky Daniels and Jonathan Brandmeier and John Records Landecker, Larry Lujak, and Tommy Edwards. I was listening to late night talk show hosts, guys with names like Dr. Milton Rosenberg, and who's still on the air in Chicago, by the way, and thought, boy, that is cool. They get to talk to these guys who know all this stuff and ask questions. It was either that or sports announcing. Like most guys, there's something genetic about that. But when I got into college, after several years in high school of really enjoying the debate team, I was high school debate team captain for a couple of years and qualified for the Illinois State Championships my junior and senior year. We got smeared at the at the state level, but at least we qualified. I think we went like 3 wins, 15 losses our first year, and I think we were like 8 and 10 our second time around. But that was really energized me. And I got to college and discovered, the school I chose, contrary to what they told me when the junior or senior kid who was taking us around for the tour told me, does not have a debate team. Well, rats. But I got involved in the college radio station and thought, well, maybe I can do, news or sports or something. And I did wind up calling college basketball for a couple of years for Knox College. And for some odd reason, after the first program I did, which was hosting a classical show, which is funny because I knew not one thing about classical music, and now I'm married to a woman who loves opera, the local radio station in Galesburg, Illinois, called me up And now I sound like Ted Baxter from Mary Tyler Moore Day. It all started at a daytime radio station in Galesburg, Illinois. And they said they were looking for somebody who could talk and just read public service announcements, basically, and then watch the automated, tape decks on the all-night shift. And I applied, and they hired me, and I thought, wow, if I can get paid to do this, then who needs law school? So that led to a part-time job at a station outside Chicago, which led to a part-time job at a station in Rockford, which led to a full-time job immediately upon graduation in Peoria, and went from Peoria to Philadelphia to Little Rock to St. Louis in the span of 5 years. At which point, my daughter was born, and was fired by long-distance telephone call the day before Thanksgiving of 1990 by the owners of the radio station. So,
oh my gosh.
Well, that's not the worst story you can hear about the way people are fired in the radio business, oddly enough. If that kind of thing were to happen in the real world, most companies anyway, you'd have grounds for a lawsuit on your hands. But in broadcasting, that's fairly not all that uncommon. So I started looking for something else to do, wound up selling real estate for a couple of years, managed a tuxedo shop for a year, wound up in steel sales, which is what I've done more or less for the last, 18 years, 17 years, with a brief interlude in which we used audio from PID radio, by the way, to land a job as a talk show host and at a commercial station in Columbia, Missouri, which was kind of fun. Did that for a year and a half, which was long enough to remember why I'd gotten out of the business the first time. So the podcast came about after we got married, and knowing that Sharon was a writer, I'd always had a fascination with the idea of writing. Loved science fiction as a kid, read everything I could by Larry Niven, who is one of the greatest hard science fiction writers of the second half of the 20th century. I would take Larry Niven over Isaac Asimov and put him right up there with Harlan Ellison, Heinlein. Larry Niven is really good. And I think one of the things, I'm going to rabbit trail, forget that. But anyway, the idea that Sharon was a writer and was creative in that way was very appealing to me. So when we met and we married eventually after, a surprisingly short courtship, it was one of those things where you knew it was right.
Right.
I guess in keeping with our geeky personalities, we actually met over the internet very early on. This was back in like 97 when most people were still just learning that there was an internet. So, not long after that, it may have been about 2002, I think it was, I read something online about something called National Novel Writing Month, which was a challenge being put out by a group to would-be writers to generate 50,000 words of something in 30 days. Sharon did it no problem. She cruised through and wrote almost the first draft of a manuscript, 100,000 words in a month.
Wow.
I think I got like 17,000 installed. I managed to do it the following year. But anyway, those first couple of National Novel Writing Month attempts were her manuscripts for Winds of Evil and The Armageddon Strain. I managed to finally flesh out the manuscripts for The God Conspiracy and for Iron Dragons. And we, for The God Conspiracy, Armageddon Strain, and Winds of Evil, we had actually approached and successfully pitched a series to a publisher that wanted to move from inspirational Christian publishing to fiction publishing. And we pitched them the idea that we would write in this fictional universe, the same universe, using some of the same characters back and forth, but writing independently of one another. And so she borrowed a couple of my characters. I borrowed a couple of her characters. And so if you read Winds of Evil, The Armageddon Strain, and The God Conspiracy, you'll see that there are some characters shared back and forth, even though we wrote those stories separately. Well, the publisher thought it was cool, but by the time we got to the editing process of The God Conspiracy, after they had published her first two novels, they started getting a little nervous. They couldn't understand why we were putting things like UFOs, crop circles, and I think the government conspiracies and cover-ups that I included in The God Conspiracy, and I used every one I could get my hands on, Rex 84, FEMA camps, 9/11, and, all kinds of it was all in there. The Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission. I had everything in there that you could possibly think of, or most everything anyway. And This was during the presidency of George W. Bush, when you'd go to the Christian Bookseller Association's convention and see life-sized stand-up cutouts of George W. Bush advertising the faith of our president. So, accusing the government of perhaps being complicit in 9/11 or at least perhaps being infiltrated by powers, principalities, thrones, and dominions didn't perhaps play very well with the Christian publishing house. So we agreed to just walk away from our agreement, and we began publishing our own. So how to market when you don't have a budget? Well, radio background, and I just heard about this thing and started doing some reading about this new concept that Adam Curry of MTV fame had come up with, along with another fellow, called podcasting. iPods were new. The idea of using RSS code or XML code to syndicate recorded audio was a new thing. And so did some reading, figured out how we could do it with a laptop and a couple of cheap headset mics. And so we the first PID radio, which at the time was called Myth Arc Radio. That was the title we had given to this story arc, this series that we had created. The Myth Arc, which, in our grand scheme was going to cover everything from, creation to, up to the time of the arrival of the Antichrist, perhaps. We didn't really want to get into, doing Left Behind type stuff. And now that, Brian Godawa has done the Nephilim thing, so we've kind of shrunk the timeline there if we ever go back to it. But anyway, we did a first show telling people why they should buy our novels. That took about 15 minutes. Then it was like, okay, we've done one show. What are we going to put up on the website for next week? 15 more minutes on why people should buy our novels? No. Why don't we talk about what inspires us to write? And that's what led to what became PID Radio. I think we changed the name of the show from Myth Arc to PID on the 4th episode. And I think the 5th episode we interviewed either Mike Heiser or Guy Malone. I'd have to go back and look in the archives to find out. And that just went from there. We figured out how to jury rig our telephone system so we could get the audio from the phone into a laptop. I think it involved alligator clips on the phone through a Radio Shack interface, plugged into the mic input on our digital video cam, and then the output of the video camera into the FireWire input on the laptop. It was a weird setup, but it worked. And again, that just sort of led to where we are today. We figured out the technical stuff. We kind of smoothed out what we were doing as far as the discussion we were having. And then over time, we just decided, well, how best to use our time. I really enjoy talking to people who I think have something important to say. Sharon prefers just the banter back and forth between the two of us. So that's when we decided to split off a separate program. And that's when A View from the Bunker came to be about 5 years ago. So that I can do the interviews and Sharon can just focus on just, research and then the banter the two of us have. And it's because we enjoy talking to one another. PID Radio is basically just when we switch the microphone on during the conversations we often have anyway. So,
well, and it works perfectly because it kind of becomes two totally different formats, but yet it feeds into the same subject matter and two sort of different perspectives on a similar topic, and I love both. I love, obviously it's been said many times, I'll just say it again, but you, Derek, are just sort of like the gold standard for interviewing in this niche. And, I have no doubt that what you do and what the two of you do is responsible for sort of this explosion of podcasts now that are in this niche. And I really, really appreciate it. And I also just, to shout out to Sharon, there really are not very many women in this niche. There's lots of women in ministry just in the Christian world at large. Right. But what we do and the types of things we talk about, there really just are not very many female voices, and it's awesome that the most prominent one, being Sharon Gilbert, is so well-spoken and so, not only is she just really intelligent, but she just kind of exudes this warmth, and she's kind, and she is really the standard that I think we should all aspire to as women in this niche too. So, I have to just geek out on one thing really quick here, because, you know, you and I have the debate thing in common. And I have to tell you this story. This is major rabbit trail, has nothing to do with anything. But when I was in debate, and I want to say this was maybe in college, we were trying to build the larger debate community in North Dakota. And building anything in North Dakota is kind of tricky. It's like, if you're not into football, you know, what good are you? You know, or hockey. But we
or cattle.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, cattle tipping and the whole thing. And so, yes, that legitimately happens. But we had received an invitation from the North Dakota Adventist Academy, which was, yeah, I know, we were all shocked. And essentially it was just this sort of boarding school for Seventh-day Adventists that were in sort of maybe like the 17 to 19-year-old range. And we're like, okay, let's do it. So we went out there, and the whole thing was supposed to be a debate demonstration to show them what it's all about. We just chose a, you know, innocuous topic, and then myself and another girl debated it in front of this group of Adventists in their little conference room area. And there was a lot of them there. It was kind of intimidating, but they were on the edge of their seats. They were listening so closely, and they were really into it. And we thought we just had this captive audience. And then at the end, we gave them ballots so they could score who won the debate. Mm-hmm. And as we left, you know, we were so excited to open up all these ballots and see who won. And every single one of them, without exception, said that God won. That they did not like the debating situation at all. They thought it was pointless. And I don't know if it was, you know, something they decided upon ahead of time or what. But yeah, in every case it was, you know, God is the only judge that matters. We do not have the authority to judge. And it was so funny because we were just like the wind was out of our sails.
That's interesting. And of course, I think we've discussed previously that the Cheyenne, it was called the Cheyenne River Academy back in the day. And that's very close to my grandparents' farm where my mother was raised. And my grandmother and grandfather met at that academy. Now, of course, having revealed this background, I'm sure there are discernment ministries out there who are now going to start combing through our programs to see evidence of Seventh-day Adventist theology in the programs that we've been putting out there for the past 9 years. And I can tell you flat out, there ain't any. And frankly, I'm not even really sure, being perfectly honest, of the theology, the doctrines of the SDA Church. I really don't know. It was one of the best schools available in rural North Dakota in the early part of the 20th century. And so a lot of the German settlers, like my great-grandparents, would send their kids there because they would get good education. All my mother, frankly, remembers about the SDA theology is that we're not supposed to work on Sunday and not supposed to wear makeup.
Yeah.
That's about the extent of it, and she didn't even pass that on to me. Thankfully, I've never taken the makeup in the first place, so we didn't really have to worry about that. But no, that's very interesting because it's not often that you find people who are even from North Dakota, much less people who even know where that place in North Dakota is. So
yeah, I love that we have the North Dakota connection because I have had several emails from people who tell me that the existence of North Dakota is a conspiracy, and that is absolutely, like, people really believe that that they think that it's just like sort of on a map, but really it's like a militarized zone and nothing really exists here.
You know, the interesting thing about my mother's family's arrival in that part of the world in 1894 is that the part of the world they emigrated from is now currently a global hotspot because it's Ukraine, Moldova, and that's where we're kind of playing chicken with Russia at the moment. And through the internet, I've actually met a young man who is a distant cousin living in Germany now. Many Germans left the area of Württemberg, which is the area around Stuttgart, in the early part of the 19th century at the invitation of Catherine the Great. And so all these, and at the time they were Lutherans, evangelical Lutherans, traveled there to the region around Odessa. There's a geographic area there called Bessarabia, and formed all of these settlements. And they farmed and built these little communities and kept excellent records, which is how we know we're actually cousins. But by the time of Catherine's grandson assuming the throne, the privileges that they'd been granted by Catherine had been, taken away. And so, while the people who stayed behind in what is now Ukraine and Moldova didn't really have it easy, and a lot of them were repatriated to Germany during the Stalin era, just prior to World War II. The folks who emigrated to South Dakota, North Dakota, Kansas, Nebraska, and so forth, they didn't have it real easy either, because this was within living memory of Little Bighorn. Mm-hmm. And there ain't no trees to build shelter with in the wintertime in the Dakotas. So while the folks back in Ukraine and Moldova were dealing with Cossacks, my ancestors were kind of still on the lookout for the Sioux and building houses out of blocks cut from turf, sod. Just a kind of a long rabbit trail, but just a reminder to those of us in the advanced West that, things could be a whole lot worse.
Yes.
We talk about the persecuted church, and there are areas in the world where Christians are suffering mightily, no question about it. But here in America, we tend to have such an Amerocentric view of the world. They're making bakers bake cakes for people whose views on marriage don't fit theirs. Okay, yeah, that is oppressive, but live through a winter in North Dakota in a house made blocks of grass and mud.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
Yep, and I often say to people too, when they really get on this thing about how oppressed we are, I mean, sure, there's truth to all of it, but my goodness, I'm so thankful that I live in the United States for what time we have left. I am so thankful I live here almost as opposed to anywhere else in the world.
Amen.
It's not that bad, and it'll likely get worse, but right now we should just be thankful for what we have. And you're right, up here there's a group of people. It's not uncommon to have people identify as German Russian, which is almost unheard of in other parts of the United States. But when they say, like, what's your background? Well, we're German Russian or Russian German. It's kind of interesting. It's an interesting little it truly exists. I will tell you that. Yep. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, because I really was, I was thinking of the two of you being sci-fi authors, and one of the things I just love about both of you is that you're legitimate sci-fi geeks, and you're not ashamed of it. Yeah. Just like my husband and I, we devour series on Netflix, Stargate, Fringe. We love all that stuff. And there's some more hard-nosed folks out there who would suggest that as Christians, we shouldn't be watching those shows, all the secular media. And they do tend to have a bias towards humanism or even transhumanism. And as a result, I personally think they're missing out on some really interesting programming that could even spark conversations through a Christian worldview. What is it about the sci-fi genre that attracts you?
Outside of the box thinking, good storytelling is good storytelling, whether it's a chick flick or a sci-fi movie. And so the characters have to be really interesting. And the best science fiction is character driven. Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone, for example. A lot of the science fiction that I really enjoyed, again, Larry Niven as an example, created really interesting characters that you could believe and empathize with and really care about what happened to them through the story. But being able to imagine, taking those human stories into unknown worlds, outer space, inner space, near future, far future, examining the world through different sets of eyes, perhaps with, characters that were totally alien in thought, as well as, so interesting thought experiences, experiments. I don't know. I really enjoyed that. And I think, to be perfectly honest, some of what attracted me to science fiction as a kid was, and especially hard science fiction of the type Niven wrote, and of what you might see. You might classify, say, Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, as hard science fiction, as opposed to. I never really got into the sort of fantasy genre, although I have read Tolkien and really enjoyed it. That's kind of an exception to the rule, because it always struck me that when I read fantasy stuff, and I tried a couple of times, it was like, oh, okay, every time the author gets to a point where they can't figure out what to write, they change the rules, and, magic comes in and, poof and stuff. So I just never got into that. But I think that the appeal of science as savior entered into the appeal of science fiction to me as a kid. And I would agree that even when I started writing, my first attempt at writing, I was a little unsure of how a Christian could write science fiction, because the genre is so closely married to the idea that science will eventually save us, that someday we will defeat death through superior technology, whether it's through halting the aging process or through uploading ourselves into a cosmic mainframe. And ultimately, once I realized that, and this was after marrying Sharon, to be perfectly honest, realized that you could be a science fiction storyteller and still be a Christian. You don't necessarily have to speculate on man's ultimate future as a science fiction author. First of all, not every story has to be about where is mankind ultimately headed, like say 2001: Space Odyssey, or what was the other Clark story, the 9 Million Names of God, or I forget, I'm probably getting the title wrong, but but anyway, you don't necessarily have to go down that path, first of all. But secondly, if you're creative, I mean, the fact that that there is a creator God does not necessarily mean that as a Christian you can't speculate about the existence of other habitable worlds, or perhaps even, as Mike Heiser has pointed out, perhaps even the existence of other intelligent species on other planets. I don't know if you and Mike got into that conversation. I don't recall during his interview.
No, we didn't touch on that too much.
I just remember him admitting his, my superiority in his Naked Bible Fantasy Baseball League. But the fact that a scholar like Mike Heiser could say, look, if E.T. were to land on the White House lawn and step out and legitimately be an extraterrestrial, that would not disprove his Christian worldview. That when God created mankind, humanity, man and woman in His image, it was not to say, as some preachers have taught over the years, that God is about 6 foot tall with a biped with 10 fingers and 10 toes and so forth. Is that we are God's imagers, or we are God's representatives on this planet. We are to serve the same role of having dominion over this planet that God has over all of the cosmos. And it is possible, although we don't know from Scripture, that there may be other imagers of God elsewhere on other planets. And while Jesus died for humankind, that there may be other planets inhabited out there somewhere. And that would not necessarily contradict Christian doctrine or Christian worldview. And that's really kind of out of the box thinking. But once you say, okay, well, if that's possible, and now I will add this, Mike also makes very clear he doesn't believe that there is any evidence yet to date to indicate that the Earth has in fact been visited by extraterrestrials. So just don't want to create the wrong impression.
Right.
But what he's saying is, if it were to happen, that would not be the end of his faith. Unfortunately, there are a lot of Christians out there for whom that would be a big problem because they don't quite get that point. And so, as a fan of science fiction who was kind of drawn in by the idea of a Star Trek future, the Gene Roddenberry, the Gospel according to Roddenberry, where mankind has managed to overcome problems like poverty and war and famine and the little superstitions that we used to call religion. That's all been superseded and made obsolete in the Star Trek universe, according to Roddenberry. That all seems really appealing because as a kid growing up in the technologically advanced cultures of the West, we can see with our own eyes how technology is advancing year by year, month by month, week by week. And that seems more real to us because we can see it, feel it, touch it, experience it much more readily with our human senses than we can this invisible creator God who spoke the universe into existence and is coming back someday to judge the living and the dead. Yeah, right. So as a Christian, I can understand, knowing the path that I've traveled, that there are other people out there who are being lured into this scientistic worldview. And as Christians, we should be prepared to address that, especially when you look at surveys that indicate that more people, more Americans anyway, are willing to believe that the earth has been visited by extraterrestrials than believe that Jesus Christ literally rose from the dead. Right. So which is the fringe topic here? UFOs or, believing in the Trinity? In real world terms, we Christians are becoming more and more fringe in the eyes of the rest of the world. Yeah. But the weird thing is we're even considered fringe within the Christian community because, again, there are a lot of Christians, nominal Christians, who have adopted a scientistic worldview. And so I guess when Sharon and I are trying to do is we're not really reaching out so much to people who are outside the church. It's more of a message for those in the church that there is information out there to counter the programming that you and your children are receiving through television, the movies, and school. And we really need to give them that information and teach them, train them up in the way they should go according to the Bible, so that they aren't lured into this worldview that says, look, if I can't see it with my own eyes, I'm not going to believe it. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not going to be a good excuse when the moment after you draw that last breath. That's not going to be an excuse. Nobody told me. Well, no, we kind of were. Yeah. But maybe we need to do a more effective job of getting that message out there. Mike Heiser is a hero in that regard, in that he is taking essential doctrine, staying true to the text, in my view, and bear in mind I'm not a scholar, but in doing his best to stay true to the text and explain the supernatural foundation of the Christian faith to Christians who have more or less abandoned it. Okay, all that's the miracles and all that stuff that basically stopped after the death of the Apostle John. If at the last page of the Bible, which that last chapter is pretty weird, we don't get it anyway. None of this stuff goes on anymore. Well, except that there might be something to this ghost thing with all these ghost hunter shows out there, and so and maybe these UFOs are there's something to that. There's so many people talking about. Maybe there's something to that after all. And the churches are just letting that slide and not really addressing it, focusing on your best life now. Mm-hmm. The ear-scratching messages of happy that you hear from the Christian pastors who land on the New York Times bestseller list. That is lulling people into a being spiritually asleep. And our children are going to pay the price.
I agree. And, as I said in my intro, and I think I even talked about it a little bit on the last episode with Chris Putnam, so at the risk of being a little repetitive, it's I found that when I first became a Christian, like when I became a really real Christian,
there's a difference. I know. I went through the same process.
Yeah. Like Christian in name only for a while there. Mm-hmm. But I found that, because of my background in the supernatural and the paranormal and all of this stuff, I had this working understanding that the supernatural was a real thing. And when I became a Christian, I felt like most of the Christians on my periphery were trying to take that out of my mindset. And I understand where they were coming from in that they didn't want me to be involved in this new age mumbo jumbo and all of that. But at the same time, ironically, I felt like they were trying, now that I'm a Christian, I was being sort of compelled to be more naturalistic in my thought process, which is really bizarre. I didn't understand it. And I find that what I really appreciate is when people aren't afraid to go outside of the circle of Christian writers and thinkers to find, other perspectives that they can then apply to what it is that we know to be true. You mentioned like Heinlein, and he wrote Stranger in a Strange Land, and there's biblical references in there, but it's not a biblical book, right. But to be able to not be afraid of that kind of subject matter and to absorb it and then parse it through that Christian worldview and through that biblical lens, I think it gives us a little bit of a leg up when we do interact with the culture. And along those lines, on View from the Bunker, there's no doubt that the subject matter is always pertinent to a Christian audience, but you do not shy away from having guests on your show who are, openly not Christian, like Peter Levenda. My favorite episode is the one you did with Hugo de Garis. I quote it all the time because it was just so fascinating to hear that perspective on transhumanism. Why do you think it's important for Christians to hear opinions and research from people who aren't necessarily Christian?
If you don't understand the way others think, it's very difficult to make a cogent case for the opposition. I mean, going back to the debate paradigm, if you're the first or second negative speaker and you don't have a clue about what the affirmative case is, you can't really argue against it very well.
Right.
Now, that's not to say that in Dr. de Garis's case, I think he understands the problem very clearly. Mm-hmm. Just doesn't have a Christian worldview to address it. And I think in also Peter's case, Peter Levenda, I think he also understands the problem clearly. I mean, when he flat out says that the United States government essentially, or elements within it, essentially sold its collective soul for the Nazi technology after World War II, for Nazi mind control techniques and perhaps even aircraft technology after World War II. He grasps the problem. But then he presents as a response, a solution. Let's leave dealing with the supernatural to people who know what they're doing. In other words, people who have properly prepared and studied this and can interact with the supernatural on a safe in a safe manner. Dr. de Garis, whose response, and I want to talk to him again, although now that the guys at Canary Cry have done it, it's kind of like, they've asked the questions I probably would have asked. So, and by the way, props to them. That's another podcast. That's a must listen on my podcast, my iPod.
One of my favorites.
But Dr. de Garis suggests that the main problem with artificial intelligence research, if I understand a recent article by him, that it's being driven by Americans, and that Americans, since we're the product of a relatively young culture, and the culture which was sort of a mashup of a number of different cultures that have come together, a nation that's been together since mid to late 18th century, essentially in its origins Anglo-Saxon, but increasingly becoming diluted. Well, diluted sounds like I'm doing the whole race thing. But the point being that we're a relatively young culture, and so we don't really have the wisdom required to handle technologies like massively intelligent machines, artellects as he calls them, and that we should let older cultures like the Chinese do it because they're wiser and older. And I kind of scratch my head at that and say, well, you accuse Americans of being somewhat arrogant and reckless because of our relative youth as far as cultures go, and our insistence that we should be the ones to decide because we're the ones who came up with all of these nifty inventions. But yet he's displaying the same sort of intellectual arrogance as a multicultural individual himself. I enjoyed conversing with him. I think he's a very intelligent guy, and I think he perceives the problem correctly, that the development of artificial intelligence could be a species-threatening event. But as Christians, I think our worldview is like hey, well, even non-Christians are seeing this too. I shouldn't just, say this is a Christian worldview, but looking at the problem, perhaps the response is, maybe we shouldn't develop self-replicating artificial intelligences that might see us as a threat to their species dominance and decide to take us out. Maybe we shouldn't go there. And yet the AI community's response is essentially the same as Peter Levenda's. Well, we should continue, but cautiously, and only let people who really know what they're doing play with these toys.
Right.
Okay. It's like giving a child a loaded gun and saying, okay, now by handling this gun, you may end your life as you know it. I mean, you may but go ahead and do it. Just don't, just be really, really, really careful. Like, yeah, I'm not so sure that's the best response.
Yeah.
But again, if you don't understand where they're coming from, it's easy to find yourself arguing against a straw man. Getting back to your question, and I think that there are some non-Christians. I just don't see the point in bringing them on because they have a particular view to promote that I find either completely wrong, misleading, disagreeable, or there's nothing to be learned in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but it's my program, so it's my prerogative to be wrong on my own show. But when there are people who are, I think, honest and in their intellectual inquiries, as I perceive Peter Levenda, Dr. Hugo de Garis to be, then I don't have a problem talking with them, and I don't have to browbeat them and say, you really need to accept Jesus Christ, bam, 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 and hit them on the head. They may or may not listen. They may or may not respond to that. But, the whole point is engage in discussion and treat them with gentleness and respect. The whole love your neighbor thing applies to all the neighbors, not just the ones who agree with me politically, theologically, or, in terms of who should win the National League Central. But we can learn from those who disagree with us or hold different worldviews from us. And if we have an honest and open exchange, who knows? The opportunity might arise to actually have an honest discussion of why I believe what I believe. And, maybe if that door is open and I can, share that, there may be an opportunity there. Or it may be that through a rational and reasonable discussion with someone of a different worldview, they may begin to perceive that, hey, not all of us Christians are out there are like, say, the Westboro Baptist Church, okay?
Right.
Or the Dominionists who believe that they're on a mission from God to take over the planet so that Jesus can come back. Not all of us fall under those labels. Not all of us believe what they believe. Some of us are genuinely concerned with the well-being of our fellow men and women, the people around us, whether they're Christian or not.
You make a really good point, because when I was listening to your interview, I re-listened to your interview with de Garis, and I always like it when you have Peter Levenda on. Neither one of them are particularly antagonistic to Christianity.
That's very true.
And they do have beneficial information to share that we can all learn from. And particularly with de Garis, I re-listened to the interview that you did after watching the Age of Deceit 2 film that Gans made. Hugo de Garis came into my mind because of that whole storyline that Gans was telling in his movie. And then I listened to his interview on Canary Cry, and it's interesting, as sort of a side note, that de Garis seems to be, dare I say, evolving in his perception of the possibility of a creator. I mean, he certainly is not Christian yet, but he speaks pretty openly that he accepts intelligent design. And of course, they're not the same thing, right. But everybody's journey is a little different. He might unpack it a little bit differently, but he seems to be perhaps heading in a positive direction. And I think that largely is probably due to the fact that Christians haven't been afraid to engage him. he's got these people with the Christian worldview in his face periodically, and it's maybe causing him to think. So that's another really interesting way to think about it.
Well, hopefully that bears some fruit, because he's again seems to be a genuinely good man who's concerned. He is concerned about the fate of other people, and that's why he's so disturbed about the track that artificial intelligence research, robotics research, deep learning neural network research is taking. He is concerned that that's going to lead to what he calls giga death,
right?
Ultimately, which is you use a term like giga death, it's like okay,
it's a scary word.
Bad, right? Really bad. And that's what really motivates him. I mean, he's retired. He doesn't need to do any of this. He could just kind of quietly live out his life. Not engaging in this at all, just to go about his daily routine and not speak up about it. And yet, every now and again, you'll see an article that he's written pop up that is critical of those who believe that our future is to achieve and get past the singularity. And he doesn't. He actually. He seems to be, now that I think about it, more derisive and more condescending, really, to those who look at the singularity for their salvation than what I have heard of him in his interaction with people like Gans and Basil, with Christians, people of faith.
Yeah.
I hope that's accurate. I hope that's right.
Yeah, I hope so too. Now, in that discussion, you mentioned dominionism. And what I really wanted to talk to you about, when we first started planning to do an interview for this show, it was previous to the Orlando conference.
Right.
And I was just so eager to pick your brains about this discussion that you were going to be presenting at the Prophecy in the News conference. And now that it's post-conference, I feel like I can pick your brains even more because I'm not ruining it for anyone. I've heard nothing but positive coming out of your presentation, that you got a standing ovation and that people were really receptive to it. Tell us what that was about. I'm really interested to hear kind of more about what your presentation was about.
Well, I did too, and actually that was the one that was in the main room. For whatever reason, Bob Ulrich at Prophecy in the News scheduled me as the last speaker in the main hall for the entire conference. So it was a little scary, especially because he didn't tell me about it until we were about a week and a half before the conference, and I was interviewing him to, talk up the live streaming video option. And he mentioned that in the main room we'll have of course Gary Stearman and Chuck Missler and Jonathan Kahn and L.A. Marzulli and Derek Gilbert, and I'm like, wait, what? So, but that was a presentation that Bob saw originally on when he watched the video that Prophecy in the News produced from the Chicago Prophecy Summit, which was last spring. Russ Dizdar, L.A. Marzulli, Sharon and me, Doug Hamp, Rob Skiba. And I had really focused in that presentation on how our electronic devices are being used to spy on us. And it was a year before it was several months before the revelations Edward Snowden released about the NSA and the extent of the NSA's spying surveillance on average Americans. No Fourth Amendment protections anymore. The NSA basically is scooping up everything that we do electronically: phones, email, internet downloads, Netflix purchases, things like that. Everything that we do basically is winding up somewhere in a data center. Whether the NSA has it now or they can get it by requesting it from your internet service provider or your cell phone carrier, it's out there. And a digital picture of you, digital profile of you, can be built by somebody somewhere in a government facility, or at least the facility of a contractor working for the government, pretty easily. And I played a video clip that I'd found of Shia LaBeouf, who was a star in the film Eagle Eye with Billy Bob Thornton.
Mm-hmm.
The basic plot was that a super high-tech artificial intelligence called Aria, which was responsible for just essentially doing what the NSA is trying to do now, just collect everything and then try to build a mosaic, a picture out of all of this digital pocket litter that we carry around with us, CCTV cameras, credit card purchases, cell phone calls, emails, etc. Gather it all, analyze it, and formulate a course of action. In the film, Aria decides that the president, because the president has decided to embark on a foreign policy initiative friendly to Russia, that the president and his cabinet have become a threat to national security. So Aria then manipulates Shia LaBeouf's character and several others into trying to assassinate the president. And in an interview for the movie with Jay Leno, Shia LaBeouf told Leno that an FBI consultant said, we can record your cell phone. You know, we've got cell phone calls on everybody, you know, anytime we can, you know, pick up and Shia's like, yeah, right, sure. And then the FBI consultant played a recording of a phone call Shia LaBeouf had made 2 years prior to the film. And he said the really embarrassing thing, it was one of those, what are you wearing type of phone call. Now, bear in mind that Eagle Eye, the film, was released in about 2009, which means that the filming began late 2007, which places this phone call somewhere in around 2005. Okay?
Wow.
So this is not new information. And, you know, again, Bob saw this and saw that it was, again, the conference took place several months before the major news media picked up on the NSA spying thanks to Edward Snowden. And so he said, okay, you need to do this again, and we're going to put you in the main room. So in the intervening 16 months, I realized that the point of the talk is not that the government is spying on us, because this really isn't news. And in fact, I went back and found a PID radio program from May 5th of 2006. Okay, 2006, in which we talked about that very thing. NSA is intercepting Americans' phone calls. So again, this is not news to people who were paying attention, and it wasn't a secret source that we had. This was an article published by USA Today in 2006. So we're not, you know, tapping secret sources. You know, we don't have insiders feeding us information, classified information. We just have a net out there, and we just kind of watch the news for stuff that catches our attention and kind of try to fit it into a puzzle. So it's not news. Why is it, well, the other question, which I didn't get into in the presentation, is why is it news now? I have theories on that, but that's, you know, beside the point. The point is that Christians be aware that, everything that we do is being watched or recorded or stored somewhere.
Right.
And think about that. Now, think about this. You know, I, as a Christian, should be aware of this all the time anyway, because I believe in a God who's omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. Okay? So I should be believing that I'm watched all the time anyway, and yet I still do things that I would really, occasionally anyway, would rather not have everybody know about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not proud of that fact. And I'm not proud of the fact, that sometimes the threat of somebody knowing what I'm doing on the internet could become public.
Right.
And that changed, you know, frankly, that changed my behavior.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not proud of that fact. And I'm not proud of the fact that the perception of me by other people was having more of an effect on my walk and my beliefs and the way I acted than the fact that, you know, I'm being watched all the time by the creator of the universe who came to earth and died for me. Why is it taking this knowledge that, gee, somebody might know that, you know, kind of, well, anyway, anyway, so that, my point was, let's not look at that. Let's just understand, first of all, that this is real, and just keep that in the back of your mind when you're deciding, you know, what you want to, how you want to respond via email to somebody, or the kind of things that you want to scroll through when you're trolling the internet. Just keep that in mind. But more importantly, we need to consider, as Jesus told us, the one who can throw body and soul into hell. Let's not worry about the one who can, just kill the body, but not the soul, okay? The government, all right. Governments have been killing people, their own people, for as long as mankind has been around. This is not news. In fact, we Americans, again, with our very narrow view of reality and our very short memories of history, we Christians have had a very unique period of personal liberty that is really unprecedented in human history. And I think the ancient Assyrians would have, the average citizen, the guy on the street of Nineveh in the 7th century BC would have loved to live in modern-day America.
Yeah.
Personal liberties that we have, things that we can say about the president, our governor, people in power with whom we disagree. We've got a lot more freedom to shoot off our mouths than they did back then. So let's just keep that in perspective, that we've really had it pretty good these last couple of centuries here in America. Let's worry more about eternity. And let's look at how these devices might actually play into, first of all, drawing our friends, families, and children into a false eschatology, and how that might impact their eternal home. And that was the direction I took with that discussion. I went into the transhumanist discussion from there, and also how the collection of massive amounts of data by Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, etc., and the NSA and so forth might actually be an attempt by true believers in the transhumanist agenda to create the noosphere, or to achieve the singularity. So, and that was kind of eye-opening for folks, and I think that's why the standing ovation. But also because while this is a disturbing topic and it's a little frightening when you think about it, having an all-powerful one-world government, which as Christians we should, understand where that's leading, and the role that technology plays into it. Technology may also be an answer to prophecy or fulfillment of prophecy, because we're told that when Jesus returns, at the head of a heavenly army, every nation will see him and will weep, because suddenly they realize, oh, this is all real. But everyone is going to see him at once. Now think about the technology of the video phone. We live, for the first time in human history, at a time when somebody with an internet connection or a 4G connection and a video phone can literally make it possible for everyone on the planet to see something in real time. Now, I don't have any doubt that God could make this happen supernaturally, and that's why John wrote it down, and why Daniel wrote it down, and when Jesus even prophesied that when he returned, all nations would see him coming in the clouds. I have no doubt in my mind that the Lord can make this happen supernaturally, that all eyes would see him. But for those skeptics who don't believe in a supernatural, invisible creator God, the fact that, hey, you probably hold in your pocket the instrument that could make this prophecy happen. This cell phone, this iPod, fulfillment of prophecy, perhaps. Just think about that. And perhaps, hey, maybe that's an opening line in a witnessing opportunity for somebody who's skeptical about all this. Now, on the other side of the coin, the other presentation I gave, which is the one that was new at Orlando, dealt with dominion theology. And after that, I have received some emails about it and some wise counsel from brothers in Christ who I think have given me good direction on this. It's similar, the presentation, to a chapter that I've contributed to a new anthology for Tom Horn about dominion theology. And I went back and I rewrote it, and I took out a lot of the personal names because I was naming names in the presentation and in the chapter that I wrote. Unfortunately, when you do that, and this didn't occur to me when I was putting together the presentation, and this person in that ministry and this person at this ministry, they're teaching lies and they're drawing people, pulling people astray. Well, that can lead to a situation where people who are faithful to those people, because they don't see the theology or the doctrines underneath what's being taught, then are forced to choose. Okay, do I choose this guy or do I choose this Gilbert guy who I've never heard of before? And in sort of an us versus them situation. It wasn't very loving necessarily, and I'm not sure it was as helpful. And I've come to believe, rather, that it is not as helpful as the way the chapter's been rewritten and the way the presentation will be redone for the upcoming Pikes Peak conference. What is really important is understanding the false doctrines that are being taught. There is a segment of Christianity, usually hyper-charismatic, Pentecostal on steroids, that believes that we really need to we need to conquer the earth because Jesus won't come back or can't come back until we do. Furthermore, they believe that the current generation, young people that are coming up now, late teens, early 20s, are special. They're referred to by a variety of terms: new breed, Elijah generation, overcomers. I've heard a new one coming out of Kansas City here lately, forerunners. And, of course, then the one that most people have heard of, which is why it's being de-emphasized, Joel's Army. Joel's Army, the whole concept is that this generation will literally be anointed with supernatural powers and will go forth and defeat the enemies of God so that Jesus can return, because he can't or won't until the earth is made a footstool under his feet. All of his enemies are defeated, even death. Even death. And that's key, because if you read the book of Revelation, it's very clear death isn't defeated until Jesus returns and throws it and hell into the lake of fire. So, these people are assuming unto themselves, the teachers of this dominion theology or kingdom now theology, the Joel's Army movement, they are taking onto themselves work and responsibilities that we read in the Bible are reserved for Jesus Christ. The Messiah will come back and do these things. You are not him. And yet they believe they will be. They believe, based on a book written about 1950 by a fellow named George Warnock, a book called The Feast of Tabernacles, in which he lays out a sort of a prophetic timeline of the end times and uses the calendar, the Jewish calendar of feasts, as metaphors for the Christian era. And the final feast to be fulfilled is the Feast of Tabernacles. I've heard that theory before, and I'm open to considering it. But in his book, Warnock writes that Jesus will return to the church first in secret and will imbue believers, these overcomers, with basically indwell them. In other words, these overcomers, Elijah generation, forerunners, new breed, Joshua generation sometimes called. I've also seen one new man as another term being.
I was going to ask you about that. That was fascinating.
That they will literally become Jesus, that the collective body of Joel's army will be Jesus in the flesh. This is what the old latter rain revival of the late 40s, early 50s called the many-membered man-child, referring to the male child born to the woman who's pursued by the dragon in the book of Revelation. Now, of course, this is the child who rules the nations with a rod of iron. That we can understand is a pretty plain prophecy of Jesus. Okay, he's the one who rules the nations with a rod of iron, not these overcomers as the many-membered man-child. And yet, this is a very popular teaching that is being spread through some very aggressive and attractive outreach, youth group outreaches, and it's being spread around the world. And again, in the presentation that I gave in Orlando, and I wish I hadn't done it now. I stand by what I said. I just wish I had done it in a little different way. Instead of naming names and saying, watch out for this guy and watch out for this lady and watch out for this guy, that I'd focused more on watch for these teachings. Mm-hmm. Because we found even within our own family, people who are intelligent, loving, love the Lord, saved by the blood of Jesus Christ, that they were in a church being headed up by one of the most prominent and influential members of the so-called New Apostolic Reformation. So-called because they believe that God has reestablished the offices of capital A apostle and capital P prophet to the church in the 21st century. Beginning in 2001, they say that New Apostolic Reformation began, and these apostles have all the authority of the apostles of the first century. Now think about what that means for just a moment. The apostles of the first century wrote the New Testament.
Right.
So they are taking onto themselves the authority to write doctrine, which doesn't necessarily track with the doctrine we read in the Bible.
That's right.
But they believe that they have this authority. Anyway, some family members who were in a church headed up by one of the most prominent and influential apostles, and we were talking about what they call the Seven Mountains Mandate. This is their strategy for taking over the planet. They believe that there are 7 mountains of culture arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and religion. Okay, I have to kind of remember the order in alphabetical order so I can get them right. Those are the 7 mountains that must be reclaimed by Christians in order to win back the world. And interestingly, they believe that the Great Commission to go forth and make disciples of all nations, was not to go forth and witness individually one-on-one and let the Holy Spirit work in hearts, was to win nations. They believe that you can win entire cities, counties, nations, states as collective bodies, and that there is one prominent apostle in this 7 mountains mandate ministry who has said that it is not as important to convert people, although that's nice, as it is to have a Christian on top of that mountain.
Unreal.
Because a Christian on top of that mountain, then everybody in that, nation or whatever is then, ushered in the door. Because they believe, and this was actually publicized and sent out in a mass mailer. I subscribe to several newsletters from people that are in these ministries now. In January, there was a newsletter sent out by a prominent new apostle who said that the final judgment, where Jesus, the Bema seat judgment, or where judgment seat of Christ, where he judges between all the nations and divides people into sheep and goats. Well, actually, the verse says divides nations, judges among the nations. They literally believe there will be sheep nations and goat nations.
Oh my gosh.
So if you're living in a nation, and I think most of us are, you want to make sure that you're in a sheep nation, which means you want to make sure that the nation's laws and administrators are in accordance with God's word, right? I mean, if this is what determines your eternal home, you have a pretty strong motive for taking over the government so that you make sure you're living in a sheep nation. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. And then I started researching it and found out, well, this isn't new either. This teaching has been around for some time, and this is not the only guy who's come up with this. So this is the reason, I think, the justification, their motive for wanting to take over the world. They literally believe that if we don't have Christians on top of all of those mountains, arts and family and business and media and religion, that we might wind up in a goat nation and we'll be condemned to the outer darkness. Like, wow.
Yeah.
Again, it sounds so crazy, but when you start showing this to people, and then you start showing that this is actually having an impact on mainstream evangelical Christianity, their eyes get really wide. Like, whoa. Now, I'm not saying that there are mainstream Christian leaders who buy into this necessarily. As an example, I gave during the presentation the 2010 National Day of Prayer. In fact, I just drove today past a sign advertising, National Day of Prayer is like, the first Thursday in May every year? In 2010, the National Day of Prayer literally featured 7 hours. No, I take that back. That was the May Day event in 2010, where they featured 7 hours of prayer, 1 hour devoted to each of the 7 cultural mountains. And that was held on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. But the National Day of Prayer asked people to pray for the 7 centers of power in our nation. The 7 centers of power: arts and entertainment, business, education, family. Oh, wait, take it back. Arts and entertainment, that center of power had been replaced by military, which is, given Dominion theology's ultimate goal, that was just a little bit creepy.
Very creepy.
Yeah. Now, the National Day of Prayer Task Force is headed up by Shirley Dobson, the wife of Dr. James Dobson. They're about as mainstream and respected as you can get in evangelical Christianity.
Yes.
And those who endorsed and supported the 2010 National Day of Prayer included people like Rick Warren, Billy Graham, Ravi Zacharias, Johnny Erickson Tata, and so on, and a list of Chuck Swindoll. I mean, people that I really respect and I don't believe for a moment that they buy into the idea that we need to take over the world. The point was simply to show that this idea of the 7 mountains mandate is beginning to seep into mainstream evangelical Christianity. And we as Christians should step back and say, okay, while I don't have any doubt that if we were to take over these 7 areas of our culture, that we would, have a Christianized culture. But why? Why?
Right.
I mean, how does this replace, sharing the good news of, sin and salvation? Yes, you're a sinner condemned, but hey, good news, you've got to get out of hell free card. Why? Now, fast forward to 2014. Again, the National Day of Prayer is coming up in a little over a week as we record this. And while they don't openly promote on the National Day of Prayer Task Force website anymore, those 7 centers of power, they've got a spin-off ministry called the 7x7 campaign, which is to pray for the 7 centers of power 7 days a week. So it's still there. It's
right.
just, yeah. So again, it's creeping into mainstream Christianity. It's beginning to influence some of the ideas that are being tossed about and considered mainstream. These new apostles and prophets are getting involved in political campaigns. Governor Rick Perry of Texas, who held a big a big prayer event in Houston, Texas during the 2012 presidential campaign.
Mm-hmm.
That was organized by people affiliated with one of the largest ministries from among this group of new apostles and prophets. I mean, they were the ones behind the scenes coordinating all of this. And it was because of that, really, that the liberal media, especially MSNBC, picked up on the phrase Joel's Army, which is why I think the one new man phrase is becoming more popular, which is a refers to Ephesians chapter 2. Paul, writing to the church at Ephesus, told them about how Christ, with his death, had basically knocked down the wall of separation between Jewish believers and Gentile believers. And that together in Christ we are one new man. Okay, Paul was writing this from the church, from the prison in Rome, and where he was being held in captivity, telling the church at Ephesus, yes, you were Gentiles, but now because of the work of Christ, you can enter the temple. We are one new man. We are neither Jew nor Gentile. And he wrote this other places in the New Testament, neither slave nor free, Jew nor Greek or barbarian, depending on the translation. Male nor female, we're all one in Christ Jesus. That was his point. Jesus has broken down the barrier that previously separated the Jews and the barbarians, the Gentiles, the Goyim. But in this movement, there are those who are taking that as a prophetic statement, and that what they're looking for is the day in which Jews accept Jesus, as do we all. But when that happens, they believe that they and these overcomers will become one new man and will inherit the promise that God made to the descendants of Abraham, which is all the land basically from the Nile to the Euphrates, which, given the current political situation in the Middle East, would be somewhat problematic.
Right.
Yeah. So that's, I know I'm kind of throwing ideas out in different directions all at once. And again, it's a lot to absorb all at once. But bottom line is they believe they have to reclaim the planet so Jesus can return, that the current generation of young people, Joel's Army, Elijah generation, one new man, are the ones who are going to do it. Once they do it, these apostles and prophets will rule as God's government until Jesus returns.
Well, and I certainly don't deny that, we have responsibility as Christians, obviously through the Great Commission, et cetera. But when you're talking about this, I can't help but think, what on earth is the difference between this and something like the New Age concept of oneism, everybody becoming this interconnected, united one, and the concept of Christ consciousness? When you talk about these people literally believing that they're becoming Jesus,
right? The God-man, and it's and I should probably pull this up to look at the verse again. And a lot of it comes from Ephesians 2 and Ephesians 4. Ephesians 4, by the way, where he finds, or where these new apostles find their justification. It's the fivefold ministry is something that's very big among people in this movement, believing again that there are 5 offices in the church, as Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus: apostles, prophets. I'm not going to get all of these now. Evangelists, pastor, teachers, and there's another, but that apostles and prophets, the belief is that they have not been among us since the end of the first century. Here we go. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds or pastors, and teachers. And that now, the apostles and prophets are back. So we need to listen to them like the first century church had to listen to the apostles. But in Ephesians 2, let's see, writing to the church, beginning at verse 11 is the section that relates to the one new man concept. And there are some Hebrew roots teachers, by the way, who are teaching one new man. And again, I don't think that they're using it the same way that that dominionists would use it. They believe that it's a way to reach out to Jews and say, look, we will ultimately be one new man together in Christ. You don't need to give up your feasts and festivals and so forth, but just because you've accepted Jesus Christ as Messiah or Jesus as Messiah. But again, in dominionist thought, the whole one new man concept is prophetic, and they will look at the verse. Here we go. You are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, fivefold ministry, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. And that's what they will use to justify this belief, this teaching, that they will attain the fullness of Christ, that they will become God-men. And when Christ comes back, secretly to them first, and then to the whole world once they, conquer death. That's the verse that they will point to as the proof text to say that this is, been written down. It's here, Ephesians 2, right at the end of the chapter. And it's so outside the box of what constitutes Orthodox Christianity. But it's out there, and you sometimes have to do a little digging to find it. There's a book that was recommended by a young lady named Holly Pivec, Pivec, and I may not be pronouncing her name correctly. She has a website called spiritofterror.org, spiritofterror.org, and she recommended a book called Victorious Eschatology by last name Eberle, Eberle, and I should know it off the top of my head because I've done a lot of reading in this book. But they will they basically outline an eschatology for the dominionist movement. It's a partial preterist view. They believe that the prophetic interpretations of premillennialists, pre-tribulationists are wrong, that most of the prophetic events of Daniel and of Revelation were fulfilled in the first century. For example, the great apostasy, great falling away, was the Jews not accepting Jesus, and the Antichrist was Nero. So, but and then they'll use this verse, these passages from Ephesians 2 to show how Jesus will come back to the church before he comes back for the church. And just as one other kind of creepy side note, they refer to a passage from I should have had this at hand. Either 1 Peter, was it 1 Peter 4? Well, anyway, there's a passage that says judgment begins at the house of God in one of Peter's epistles. And they take that to mean that when Joel's army rises up, the first ones who get run through with the sword are the Christians who won't get on board with the program.
Wow. That's why I think it is so important, because it's clearly they decontextualize a lot of this scripture to fit it into this concept that's been built over time. And I think it is so important for people to have an understanding, especially as young Christians, I would say, to have an understanding of the orthodox concepts that we've come to understand, because it's really easy, and I use this a lot, but I call it the special knowledge sinkhole. It's really easy to get, I was not immune to this early on, where you don't realize it at the time, but you're kind of feeling special. You're feeling like you have access to something that, these mainstreamers, they just don't get it. And It's empowering you. And even when it comes to, whether it's Hebrew roots or dominionism or any of these types of things, it's about building up almost the ego of the person who's, I have access to this special knowledge, and let me tell you, you're all off track. And that's the surest sign of a cult, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's also why this movement, Dominion Theology, and the Joel's Army movement within Dominionism is so appealing to young people, because I'm sure you went through this, I know I did, especially when you're a little different, a little more thoughtful perhaps than your other classmates in junior high and high school.
Yeah.
The idea that you are special, that's why you're different, really resonates.
Yeah.
And so these kids that are being told, you are the forerunners of the return of Jesus Christ. You are the overcomers. You are the Elijah generation, who's who will precede the return of Jesus Christ, and you will defeat God's enemies. You will have superpowers, and bullets will bounce off you, and so forth. The deeper you get into it, and the more you read, you think, well, how could anyone believe this? But as you say, special knowledge, especially at a group that is susceptible and vulnerable to that kind of a knowledge, which is why the transhumanist agenda and message is so popular with kids. The idea of having superpowers like Wolverine or Spider-Man or whatever, it is so attractive.
Mm-hmm. And the people who are
this is a Christianized version of that.
Yes.
And that is why this particular movement is spreading around the world, and is reaching nations as far away as Korea and China and Europe. It's frightening. But again, if you don't have the biblical foundation, it's what's the analogy I've heard, or the metaphor? If you are simply shown monopoly money and said, okay, this is one example of what fake money looks like. Now, I'm going to put you in charge of the cash register here at the store. Don't take any fake money. Well, not all fake money looks like monopoly money. But if you show them genuine dollar bill and say, okay, this is what you need to look for. If this doesn't have this, and this, it's not authentic legal tender. Don't accept it. If they don't understand the gospel and the reasons for accepting it as true, then again, young adults, children especially, are susceptible to this. In fact, I plan to have a program here in the next few weeks with a young man who's made it his ministry to promote apologetics for youths, for teens, because there is so little of that in the churches out there. And I think he is right on the money, and that is an area that we really need to focus on. Kids need to understand why they believe what they believe. When, according to George Barna in the Barna Group, about half of the pastors coming out of Protestant seminary today, only about half, have a biblical worldview, and only about 9% of those who self-identify as born-again Christian have a biblical worldview. Then we need to focus on, let's retake the pews in the church first before we worry about retaking the cultural mountains. We're not going to retake the country for Christ when we've lost the churches.
Absolutely. And I think the barometer is always going to be who's being exalted here. In all of these philosophies, it seems to be about the exalting of the role of man and how man plays a part in its own salvation. And
absolutely,
it's a twisting of the gospel, which is it should be something that we can use as our barometer. And actually, it's interesting, and I hate to say that the people behind it have anything but, the most sincere of motivations. But
they may well be sincere, and this is a point that I wanted to correct, an error I think that I wanted to correct, and that I may have given the impression in my zeal to convey the information when I gave this presentation in Orlando that I was that I had assumed or was portraying these people who are teaching these false doctrines, that they were deliberately passing along information that is untrue, that knowingly passing along information that was untrue. And that's probably not the case. By all accounts, most of the folks in this movement that I've read about are decent, honorable people, and very sincere, but they're sincerely wrong.
Yes, and there's a spirit behind it, because it is the oldest lie. It is ye shall be as gods, and it is the thing that, has always vexed humanity. When we try to exalt ourselves. It's the problem with the New Age movement, and unfortunately we're seeing it in Christian circles now as well. And it is scary, and it's a worthwhile conversation to have. And I mean, even just in this past few minutes as you've been talking about it, I learned a lot. It's worthwhile to know. And even, with your other presentation that you gave on the main stage about spying, my gosh, what a great point that you made about how, we're more concerned on like a voyeuristic human level sometimes of who's going to bust us in our sin.
Right.
Than, the one who has been sitting there watching it all the whole time. And, but it is also beneficial to know, because there is, just the other day, there was this article that came out, and I think Sharon might have shared it, and it was about, this new video game that's coming out, and it's called Watch Dogs.
Yeah.
And there's a new website to promote this, and it's called Digital Shadow. And what the website does is it lets you log in via your Facebook, and then the digital, and it's really creepy because the main page of it says you are not an individual, you are a collection of data.
Mm-hmm.
And you can log into it, and it will do this really, really quick little processing thing, and then suddenly it'll tell you everything that it can figure out about you based on nothing other than what you have made available on Facebook.
Yeah. And if this has been available to game developers and game designers, you'd best believe that there's something even more powerful than that at work somewhere in a room in an office whose address we will never know.
That's right. And of course, because I gave into curiosity, I tried it. I had to see, because I like to think that I'm really protective of my personal information. So I was like, I'm going to try this. Nobody knows this, that, or the other thing about me. And it legitimately freaked me out. I mean, it told me who I stalk the most on Facebook. It told who stalks me the most on Facebook. It gave a personality profile on me that was pretty spot on based on nothing but, the keywords that I tend to use in my status updates. And it was kind of freaky. And then it was telling me, who of my friends are probably security risks. It was really, really creepy. And then the very last thing it does on this profile is it does this thing where it runs data to try to guess what your password is based on everything that it knows about you. And now, thankfully, I've learned my lesson about passwords, and they are the most random, unbreakable collection of nonsense. But, truly, some of the things that came up were things that I had considered. I could see myself using as passwords. So it's even just on a, especially people who have children, everybody is just so quick to put all the pictures of their little babies on Facebook and their birth dates and all of this stuff. It's important to know that you're not just sharing that with the people who are on your friends list.
That's right. You might as well staple it to your next resume.
That's right. Yeah. And so I guess I kind of went backwards in the discussion there, but, and so now you say that you're going to be giving this presentation again in Colorado?
Yeah, the Dominion Theology presentation will be one of the two that I'll give in Colorado again, but I'm going to be less specific about people. I think I'm going to include more information about George Warnock and his book, The Feast of Tabernacles, which is available for free online, by the way, the entire text, so that you can read it. It's become clear to me, and I should point out very quickly as an aside that I am by far the most educated on Dominion theology out there. There will be some guests coming up in the next couple of months who have done much better work and much more work on this topic than I have. I do not consider myself an expert, just aware. But I'll do this again in Colorado, but without naming names per se, because it's not my desire, nor is it my purpose to create an online feud of me versus somebody else.
Sure.
That's not my point. I have nothing to gain from this financially by doing it, and it certainly is not it was not a very Christian approach to it. Got a couple of emails from people who felt that I had abused the forum at Orlando by naming names. And again, in counsel with some wiser brothers, they agree that perhaps it would be more effective a message if I just focused on the theology, the doctrines. And I think that's absolutely right, because again, that takes the personality out of it. I started down this story and I did not finish it. Family members who were members of a church headed by a prominent new apostle who's been at this for quite some time and has been very instrumental in sort of shaping the whole Joel's Army aspect of the Seven Mountains Mandate. And I think that's where I left the rails there. I started explaining the Seven Mountains Mandate. And they, so we were describing Dominion theology, Sharon and I, as we talked with this couple. And they said, well, we've never heard anything like that at our church. That's not what it's all about. And then the young man said, wait a minute. Isn't there a mural with Seven Mountains right outside the fellowship hall? She said, wait a minute. You might be right. So they went back and looked. And then they started doing some research. And then they came back around and said, you guys were right. And so they've left that church. Had we attacked the apostle leading the church or this denomination directly, because he is well beloved inside that denomination, we probably wouldn't have, they probably would not have listened at all. They would have just tuned out. And I think that's what happened with the people who sent me the emails after Orlando. They heard a name of somebody who, in their view, is doing good work and seems genuine, sincere, and loving. And here comes this guy they've never heard of who's being very outspoken and perhaps even aggressive in my presentation. And so they tuned out and got angry. And so if I had avoided that part of it and just gave the presentation, given the presentation, and focused on the teachings and not on the people. And again, my reason was not to name names so that I could make a name for myself by provoking a fight. And you see that even in Christian apologetic circles, where people will pick a fight in order to raise their own visibility. Pick a fight with someone who gets more clicks so they can raise their own visibility. That is not my point at all. That's not because that doesn't get us anywhere. That's not what this is about. I mean, my goodness. The whole point is to educate people. Look, that there is aberrant teaching out there that is luring people into a worldview, into a false view of end times prophecy that may, in fact, have them building the one world government of the Antichrist.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're trying to take over the world with a theological system, okay, which is what they're trying to do, what do we as Christians read about in the end times? Well, a one world mystery Babylon in collaboration with the beast, at least for a time. And that is what I'm concerned about. Christians who don't really grasp the importance of the book of Revelation and may think that, well, yeah, we really do need to bring Jesus back and as we look at the state of the culture around us and the moral decay, it's easy to understand why this message resonates with Christians and why they can be lured into it. We've got to do something. Well, let's make sure we get the right judges in the Supreme Court so we can strike down these bad laws that are evil. Yeah, right. But okay, if we change outward behavior without changing hearts, we've just become Pharisees. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's not what God wants. We serve a God who says, if you hate your brother, if you call your brother a fool, you have committed murder. Not like murder. It's not an analogy or a metaphor or whatever. It's murder. If you lust after a person who is not your spouse, you've committed adultery. It's not like adultery. It's not similar to, or in some respects sort of shares some of the same character. It is adultery. So on that regard, how can we possibly think that changing legislators and changing legislation is what God wants from us? That's not the goal. Now, having said that, let me emphasize that I don't think Christians should withdraw from voting, and refuse to vote or participate in the political process. If we had more genuine Christians in office, this would be a better place.
Right.
But that's not our end goal. Our goal is to make disciples of all nations. And by all nations, I mean witness individually, not try to convert the entire nation of, the United States of America, because that ain't going to happen.
Right. Yeah, our mandate is not to take over the world. It makes me think of,
that miniseries that was just on the History Channel, the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And, not arguing for or against it. I'm sure it had some wonderful parts to it, but there was one scene where Jesus, rather than saying, let us be fishers of men, which is like a really important statement, they change it to, let's change the world. Jesus saying, let's go change the world. And it so many people missed it, but it is such a huge difference, and it plays into, I think, that concept that we have to be these overcomers.
Right.
And the message changes from let's change hearts to let's what's the word I'm looking for? Let's build an empire. Let's dominate.
In a recent issue of the Prophecy in the News magazine, Gary Stearman wrote a piece that made a point that I thought was really astute. He pointed out that at the final confrontation in Gethsemane, when Judas and the soldiers and the mob confront Jesus and the disciples, and Peter, in his zeal, draws a sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus heals the ear, restores it. And Gary pointed out something I thought was brilliant. If Jesus had wanted, he could not possibly have sent a clearer signal that his kingdom was not to be won by military force. It was not to be won by overthrowing the political authority of the day. He didn't do it then. We are not called to do it now. He will do it when he returns in the clouds at the head of the heavenly host. Until then, we are to, and this is in Ephesians 6. Ephesians is a great book.
Mm-hmm. It really is.
Ephesians 6, and I close A View from the Bunker with this phrase all the time from Ephesians 6:12. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. And the rest of the verse, of course, is but against powers and principalities and rulers of the spiritual darkness of this world and so forth. And again, I'm paraphrasing. Forgive me, I have a bad tendency to do that. I don't memorize enough scripture. But the rest of Ephesians 6 talks about Paul's exhortation to the Ephesians. And let me pull this up here in reading from the ESV. He uses a particular word repeatedly in the verses following verse 12. Where he writes again, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness. This is the ESV translation. I like that word. The cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Now, therefore, beginning with verse 13, take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth and having put on the breastplate of righteousness and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace, in all circumstances take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, etc. He uses the word stand and withstand several times in those verses. He doesn't say charge. He doesn't say attack. He says stand and withstand. Our goal is to hold territory until he comes, not to conquer. We are to witness. We are to make disciples of all nations. But in the military sense, and there is so much military terminology that is applied to the spiritual warfare in which we engage, that we sometimes lose sight of the fact that we are holding the high ground for now. We're defending a hill against which the gates of hell has yet to prevail, waiting for him to return, coming at the head of the cavalry.
Amen.
And that's our role.
I think that is a wonderful place for us to wrap up. What more can we really say? It moves me. This topic moves me so much, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to share that with us, because it's crucial. It's critical. I hope everybody out there listening took something from that, because it's pretty special. Derek, what are you guys working on? Some new books? Is there anything new and exciting around the corner from the Gilberts?
Well, we're praying about direction. As I mentioned, I work a day job, and praise God, my employer takes very good care of us. But it is a topic that is very important, and we're just Well, again, just praying for a direction. And if, the direction is to keep making tents for a while, well, it was good enough for Paul, so I shouldn't complain. But we are working on a book project that we hope to have out by the end of the year, which will delve into, essentially it will be a blending of what Sharon's presentations have been about the last couple of conferences, science, the biotechnology and its role in the transhumanist agenda, and then what I have been talking about with, the data gathering and how this all feeds into a religious belief that our salvation is through technology, and that we hope to get that together and have that available by the end of the year.
I'm looking forward to it. And I just really appreciate you sharing your story with us, sharing your heart and your sincerity. And I'm so thankful for the work that you do and that Sharon does. And it means the world that you came on the show today, Derek. It's been really special.
My honor.
You've been listening to Beyond Extraordinary with Natalina. For the latest headlines and program schedule, please visit extraordinaryintelligence.com.